let me welcome you all once again to this event, which is a series of events on a white paper that we have produced on how do we build up competitiveness in India. And we have fortunately, we have the right kind of uh, August panel here, as well as two distinguished government leaders, one Dr. Keshara, the chairman of the Standing Committee on Commerce, and Amitabh Kant, the chief executive officer of Niti Aayog. Only one panelist seems to be missing at the moment, who was a last-minute panelist, Gopal Agarwal, economic spokesperson of the BJP. He's got held up in a meeting with the Prime Minister at the Jewar International Airport. Having said that, let me make a very short presentation on what the key features of the headlines of the white paper is or are. Can I have the slide, please? Thank you. Now, what I've done is this is a short, a very succinct paper that we have produced. It runs into about 10 or 12 pages, and what we have done is identified what are the doable characteristics in this particular. How do we improve our competitiveness? Number one is what we require is good investment in intangible assets such as skills, health, education, to leverage a potential of public-private partnerships in each of these areas. The second is we need intra and intersectoral firm-level cooperation and participation in supply chains. Here we're not talking about collusion, but we are talking about cooperation. And we need to participate in free trade agreements like RCEP, which would have, we have lost a good opportunity. And this is something which I'm sure my colleague and co-host Nagesh is going to speak about at a later point of time. We need to ensure fair competition. Competition is one of the 4 pillars to build up competitiveness. We have a national competition policy draft which needs to be adopted. Though I must say here that this government has been promoting competition in various sectors on a very consistent basis, except that what we suggested was that it should be a convergent approach. And this is something which even the Niti Aayog has said in their own 3-year action plan, that we require reforms, including competition policy. Fourth is to modernize and enhance capacities of public institutions and to ensure convergence among policies and practices. For example, we found that there is a lot of there's a lot of difference, Dr. Keshav and Amitabh, in the difference between trade policy and industrial policy. They often, work at cross purposes. We end up with situations like inverted duty structures and so on. But this is something which is very important, and Amitabh has also served as the industry secretary of government of India and would understand what I'm talking about, including his current responsibilities, which deals with all these things. Finally, shared vision and mutual learning. Single market, we already have the GST with its own hiccups, but it is now settling down, and we are glad that this is happening. And what we also seen is, fortunately, a lot of other efforts are being done by the government in order to promote a single market. For example, motor vehicle registration. For example, ration card. And there are several examples of which I refer to what I said is that this government is very good in promoting competition, but the gains of the same by the industry in order to become more competitiveness seems to be, there's a gap. And therefore, what we have suggested is that how do we create an enabling environment for Samaj, Sarkar and Bazar to work together. We require a coherent approach, and for which Niti Aayog is sorry. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I don't know, my screen seems to be misbehaving. So anyway, for which we require a coherent approach, and Niti Aayog has been empowered to do the same. What it requires is a little more push by Niti Aayog in terms of the kind of coherence and convergence which is required across several policies. Of course, it's a very big terrain, so many state governments, state policies happening. With that, let me welcome you all once again and request Dr. Keshav Rao to please address the audience for about 10 minutes. Dr. Keshav Rao.
Well, thank you. I'll not take 10 minutes, but nonetheless, I'll speak what I wanted to say, whatever the time be. So I'm really happy to be MSU, distinguished and very well-known economists and others, and including particularly Amit Sarji, to join you in this discussion today. On a very important subject as you are thinking of competitiveness. After all, what is competitiveness? It is nothing but productivity you are asking. And what is productivity in my sense, for a politician's sense, is nothing but well-being of the people. And what is well-being of the people? It is a multi-dimensional issue. So that is what you have said. And I'm very happy, and I'm on the same page as your white paper is. So hence, if I were to speak more, it will only be repeating what perhaps the details of the paper said. Anyhow, a discussion on it must keep India's economic challenge as a backdrop. We have first poverty levels of inequality of incomes, which we must include in a discussion for when you are talking about inclusiveness. It is reported that 10% of India owns 77% wealth. It will be said, but I'm just saying this to stress that from this background we need to look to competitiveness. 60% of people of them own 4.7 of the wealth. Besides, COVID has affected the economy very severely. The average annual growth of 7% has contracted to 7% negative in these recent years. However, there is a happy note, as I see in my committees and also the reports. We are recovering, though we're still inadequate in our inclusiveness. So the stress should be on the inclusion rather than the competitiveness. We are doing well in the exports, we are doing well in the growth rate. All this be there, but inclusion is something which is still negative. One important indication of inadequate inclusion in India is that millions continue to live on the margins despite years of rising growth. As I've already pointed out, the harsh reality of living without safety nets and fell back into poverty when the pandemic struck. In addition, there is the inequality in accessing basic needs and enabling environment required for a decent quality of life. The quality of health and education, as we have stressed in the paper, remains poor. It is in this gap in overall wealth and human capital that drives the vicious cycle of inequality. It is interesting that CUTS International has carved a new area for this inclusion, Samaj, Sarkar and Bazar. We in public life restricted to only social inclusion. But admit, US is the best choice, however technical it may be. It reaches to the most micro level of economic growth and objective. What is the economic contributors after all, as I first said, in simplistic words, productivity. The set of institutions, policies, and factors that determine the level of productivity of a country. In other way, it is to consider the well-being, how it promotes well-being of people. In a sense, it matters about growth, which concerns about income levels. So it is growth and income levels along with others. The competitiveness, therefore, belongs to distinctive factors like infrastructure, macroeconomic environment, and health education. These are basic ingredients which every country needs to tackle them first. Next comes efficiency enhancers. We are not only looking at markets, whether it is the functioning of goods, labor, or financial market, but also education and training, technological readiness, which indicate how much we are prepared to move towards advanced economics. Added to it is innovation and modernization. Countries that do well in these spheres do well with higher per capita group domestic product. I'm indeed impressed by your white paper, as I said earlier, on the subject. It is comprehensive to the extent that I found myself dumbfounded to add anything new. India finds itself in the 43rd rank of the World Competitiveness Index, prepared by Institute of Management Development, that examined the impact of dreaded COVID-19 on economics in 68 countries around the world this year. But the World Economic Forum puts it at 68 in the list of 141. Among the BRICS nations, India is ranked second after China, which is at 16, followed by Russia at 45, Brazil 57, and South Africa 62, etc. This clearly shows India has been doing fairly well despite the pandemic. It is another matter whether we shall reach the target of $5 trillion economy by 2025, which I doubt. I doubt to reach the target, we must have 10 to 12% of growth rate annually. We were already doing badly earlier, and COVID has shattered our efforts. But we are not that bad. The present rate of 7 to 7.5% growth and our steady way to recovery gives us a hope. We have been involved successfully in structural reform, focusing on quality, productivity, and efficiency, the three important parameters of competitiveness. The white paper has made a laudable attempt to focus on important factors that determine competitiveness of Indian industries, like promoting investment in tangible assets, like human resource development, that is education and health, modernization public institutions. This tangible factor must attract the attention of Mr. Amitabh, because we are always only look into the figures of the actual investments and so on. I totally agree with you that that is your white paper, that in complex and multi-dimensional situations, simplistic solutions would not work. A concrete effort is necessary to work in social cohesion of Samaj, Sarkar and Bazar as possible answer to recovery from COVID-19. The points of concern, therefore, are many. Reports suggest that our financial institutions are less sound than they were before the crisis. This is more because the government had very little bandwidth to cope with another banking crisis so soon. And with high levels of personal debt, we are in for a future shock. But more important is holistic approach than isolated or transactional. There is therefore the need for putting together the synergies of Samaj, Sarkar and Bazar for holistic solutions. The unemployment rate in India has consistently remained between 5% and 8%. The CMIE data highlights that the unemployment rate was at a startling 9%. As per Niti Aayog's assessment, for 3 years, 2017-18 to 2019-20, India's problem is severe underemployment rather than jobless growth. It is a subtle point which we take note. The second wave of COVID-19 and consequent measures focused on containing the spread of the virus is likely to impact economic activity and employment adversely. While our basic concern is employment in this domain of productivity and growth, special attention is needed for labor market and workers' rights are not mutually exclusive, since they are not exclusive. The conventional idea is hire and fire with short-term contracts. While this so-called labor market flexibility may help in kickstarting job market, it can act as barrier to labor's need for secure and sustainable work. A combination of market flexibility with concrete protection of workers' right for security are found to be more successful for higher competitiveness, that is productivity, higher employment, and reduced inequality. Therefore, economic objectives combined with social and environmental objectives should focus on India's development model. A higher degree of competitiveness and significant inclusion of human capital and skill drives greater productivity, which in turn leads to growth and higher income levels, and thereby enhances the overall well-being of the nation. Here we see the strength of the three pillars, Samaj, Sarkar, Bazar, brought together, not only for growth, but overall well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And this is again to repeat what I had said earlier, that I see a lot of new entrants, and I'm glad that you're here. That if you have any questions, you could please put it in the chat box. With that, may I now request Amitabh Kant to please make his address. Amitabh, over to you. You have to unmute yourself.
Distinguished Dr. Keshav Rao, all the distinguished guests here, ladies and gentlemen, sustained growth is key to India's future. We have seen economies in East and Southeast Asia transform themselves within a generation through ushering in reforms and policies to promote private sector led growth and investment. Manufacturing and exports have long been recognized as critical in India's growth story going ahead. However, our share of manufacturing in GDP has remained broadly stagnant. Japan, South Korea, China, and to a lesser extent, Thailand and Malaysia are all examples of economies where exports played a major role in driving their economic transition. To my mind, the need of the hour is to promote our domestic manufacturing industry to drive exports and growth through achieving size and scale. Several important policy measures have been taken in this regard over the past few years. First, the decision to lower the corporate tax rate to 22% for all firms and 15% for new manufacturing firms will encourage the domestic manufacturing sector. The introduction of production linked incentive scheme in several key sectors for a limited period will help domestic manufacturing achieve size and scale. 29 central labor laws have also been rationalized into 4 codes. The definition of MSMEs have been raised upwards, allowing them to grow in size while maintaining the benefits of MSMEs. All these measures should help in domestic industry become bigger and bigger and achieve the size and scale limitation. Globally, demand is rising, and this is reflected in our export performance. In October 2021, merchandise exports stood at $35.5 billion, a 42% increase over October 2020 levels, and a 35% increase over October 2019 levels. Bringing down the cost of logistics will be a crucial enabler of India's participation in global value chains, and getting into global value chains is critical, and therefore it's very, very critical that the cost of power, that is electricity, and the cost of logistics, that is transportation, is rapidly brought down. The huge government push towards infrastructure creation is also having positive multiplier effects on the economy. Over 100 lakh crores worth of investments in infrastructure have been planned to create a world-class multimodal transport network in India. The development experience of countries in Asia show that investments in health, education, nutrition, and skill development are probably just as necessary as economic reforms. In investments in physical and digital infrastructure, they are all critical, but to my mind, sustained growth over a long period of time requires investment in health, education, and nutrition, and skill development. India is an extremely robust digital ecosystem in the world, and we are known world over for our digital inclusion model. Digital infrastructure has now become indispensable for society. The next generation technologies such as AI, cloud computing, IoT, and blockchain, amongst others, are all based on a digital backbone. The disruption caused by COVID must be seized by our private sector to become globally competitive. We can never become a manufacturing and an exporting nation without being globally competitive. And without being globally competitive, we can never be an integral part of global supply chains. And how do we make ourselves globally competitive? By making every single Indian company go digital and go lean. This requires digital transformation of manufacturing, intelligent network of machines, and processes with IT and communication technology. This also requires the passion and energy of our companies to bring together Internet of Things, cloud computing, big data analytics, manufacturing, augmented reality, robotics, cybersecurity, and machine-to-machine communication to create digital factories of the future. The startup ecosystem is perhaps best placed to tackle the new normal that has been brought upon us by the pandemic. New solutions are needed to tackle a multitude of problems, and that will require the application of the brightest and the most innovative minds. Moving forward, we must strive to get into the sunrise sectors of growth: artificial intelligence, 5G technologies, genomics, connected mobility, green hydrogen, and advanced cell chemistry. We must leapfrog into these sectors of growth. These emerging areas of growth being navigated by entrepreneurs will catalyze economic growth, augmenting quality of life and raising ease of living. Climate change is one of the realities that we must develop adoption and mitigation strategies for. If we have to fulfill our vision of making Indian products globally competitive, and this is the time for us to establish a new identity of quality and reliability. The world is transiting towards green industries, and only those companies will attract capital and enhance their valuation which go digital and which go green. Today's definition of quality also includes carbon intensity. The world does not want high carbon products. EU has set carbon border tariffs, and with the alarming IPCC report, other countries will follow soon. And therefore, if India is to become globally competitive, India must become an easy and a simple nation. Rules and regulation procedures and acts built over the years need to be uh, completely done away with. We need to be extremely easy and simple. We need to reduce the cost of logistics. We need to reduce the cost of power, which is rising because of the inefficiency of discoms. And therefore, discoms need to become highly competitive and they need to improve their efficiency of functioning. I would also say that for long, reforms in the discoms have not been effected, and it's very important that there is a private sector play. And I have grown up in Delhi, and I have seen the transformation which the reforms have brought in the discom sector in Delhi. Huge amount of power shedding used to take place. All that has changed now, and therefore either the franchisee model or the private sector participation model needs to be brought in by the state government. Many of these reforms have been carried out in the central government, and now it's time for the states to pursue reforms in a very vigorous manner. We need champions of reforms in the states, which will reduce cost of logistic, cost of power, make themselves easy and simple. If states grow at high rates of 10 to 11%, there's no reason why India will not grow at high rates, and why India will not integrate itself with the global value chain, and why India will not become a manufacturing nation. So the key to competitiveness lies in making ourselves easy and simple, making ourselves highly competitive, bringing in size and scale of manufacturing, and becoming a major exporting nation. That is really the key. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amitabh. Thank you very much. Uh, Friends, gentlemen, I always call Amitabh Kant as Amitabh Adrenaline Kant. Where he really sort of charges you up, and that's always fantastic hearing. There is a question to you, Amitabh, from Anil Kanungo, who's an IFT. How PLI can establish global competitiveness in manufacturing?
So, PLI is for a very limited period of 5 years. The objective of the production linked incentive scheme is that the beneficiary, whoever is able to compete, is able to enhance the size and scale of his manufacturing. Very high targets have been put. So, from the base level, every year he has to achieve almost a 15 to 20% growth in his turnover. And only when he achieves those targets, and he has to continue doing it year after year, year after year, year after year, year after year for the 5 years. And if he keeps doing it, that means he's made himself big in size and scale. India is basically a country of medium and small industries and a lot of micro companies. We have very few small companies. We have very few large companies. And therefore, the objective is, if you make large companies and you enable them to become large in the 5 years, then they will be able to penetrate global markets, And after 5 years, there's no need to support them. They would be working on the efficiencies of size and scale. That's the objective.
Thank you very much, Amit. I would like to now invite Deep Kapuria, who's the chairman of the CII National Committee on Trade Policy, as well as runs a very big enterprise himself and a thinking businessman. So he segues into what this particular. I raised this question particularly because I knew that Deep is going to speak after you. Over to you, Deep.
Thank you so much. Shri Keshav Rao, MP, Rajya Sabha, Mr. Kant, CEO, Niti Aayog, Pradeep ji, my fellow panelists. I'll get right into it. Of course, I am accompanied by a very, very prominent panel. And on the onset, I do need to compliment CUTS and Pradeep ji for putting a very insightful paper, and which covers a very vast canvas while addressing various stakeholders. I do believe this has gone through an extensive consultative process as well. One looks at the paper and also tries to look at various ways that competitiveness is defined. And I believe that competitiveness has to be understood contextually. Unless we understand the context in which we are talking competitiveness, we'll be looking at and not being able to actually deploy the practices which will get us where we want to get to. So I'm going to talk about few points only, and those few points are, one is that when we look at things contextually, we need to also look at the gaps which differentiate the ecosystem at the very micro level. Niti Aayog has done a phenomenal job in the aspects of mapping competitiveness, even at the state level, going right down to the district level. And that is also promoting the performance and giving them some rating indicators. They've also taken on the SDG index and dashboard, which maps the initiatives of the past 5 years. And that also encourages that policies be improved to be even looking at the very basic enablers of competitiveness. Because if we talk about, primary health or even primary education, they are the very basic enablers which many of the competitiveness is built on. I think they are one of them. The other thing contextually is when we look at companies within the four walls, and that is considered competitiveness at the sectorial level or at the firm level. We have seen that over time, we have developed various practices at the firm level, and specifically, if I may say, at the auto component sector, which have, despite and in spite an enabling environment, have done well and actually are today a part of the global value chains. They implemented TPNs, TQNs, Lean, and now are in a process of actually implementing Industry 4.0 that Amitabh talked about. So the other thing is that competitiveness is always a moving target. If you're stationary and you are static, then you can never be competitive. And by that, I mean that whenever you're engaging with a globe, you need to look at the practices which are on. And if we look at, a bit of history, the dirty, dangerous, and demeaning processes were pushed to the developing nations. And we have come right out of it by just trying to look at how we can be competitive even with the developed world. And we have achieved a lot. But however, there is a huge kind of a divergence between various industries and sectors where we still need to get out of this mindset and get out of this arbitrage of just having an arbitrage of labor itself. Another driver of competitiveness, which can change very quickly, is the various trade kind of agreements that we get into. I know that we have been challenging the various RTAs and FTAs that we have got into, and I will answer that issue of of the regional trade agreement that we didn't get into sometimes later, but there was a reason for it. But resurrection of barriers and technical considerations and standards can also make you uncompetitive. So one has to look at the regulations very closely, not only within one's own self, but when you're tying into the global value chains, you have to look at those various geographies. However, I'm going to be focusing on something that Amitabhji talked about, and that is the digitization of the economy. And being a part of the B20 over the many years, and even being a co-chair for digital transformation, I can tell you that unless we digitize at a very, very basic level to right up to the industry level, we shall be very quickly uncompetitive in the globe. And the issues that we have seen that as we are, that which was triggered by the pandemic, the deep recession, and we have seen that also historically pandemics have often indicated the beginning of a new chapter for mankind. And that could be very true for this contagion as well. And we are already witnessing a new normal where you don't have to have people accept the levels of technology, the digitization process, which was there 2 years back. Today, acceptance has gone very high, and I think that needs to be leveraged to say that can we use this as a competitive opportunity and a competitive advantage that we can build into all our, not only in our sectors, but also within our own country. So digitization becomes an imperative, which is actually, in fact, a great equalizer if we look at it. And it has huge potential of building inclusiveness in growth as well. In the post-pandemic era, we can look at a better tomorrow, not only revive our economy, but also build on to make it better so that we can look at the issues that and the risks that which were exposed during the pandemic are addressed. So the critical point becomes does one as a policymaker or as a deployment in the government bridge the digital divide and make everyone inclusive in this aspect. There's a lot which is being done obviously by the government. I can tell you my own experience that the CoWIN app is today recognized as one of the best apps in the world. I mean, I was just amazed to see a paper in US when I visited just a few weeks back that their vaccination certificate is so poor and ours was so good. They were also amazed that how India has progressed in the digitization process. But obviously we need to do much more in terms of getting remote education, basic healthcare, and the vulnerable sections of society also included in the aspect of digitization. The human touch and being human-centric to the AI systems and basically to solve the societal challenges is the key. And that could be also looked at through the developmental goals which are there and which can raise billions of people out of poverty and actually put them on the same platform. This was done by when in the B20 when Japan was leading it, and they presented the paper on Society 5.0, and that too could be a kind of a model which can be looked at for our own deployment. Industry 4.0 and global value chains, and to tie into that, I think I can't stress more and more, and I totally kind of echo the voice of Mr. Kant in what he said. However, I do need to point out our regulatory mechanism and the regulations which we all would not like to have at times need to be there. However, our existing institutions and mechanisms and the model is still struggling with to be effective to keep pace with the digitization process. In a new collaborative effort, institutions, drawings on experts of other sectors and various stakeholders need to come together and look at how we can be literally real time with our regulations and also look at resolving these issues so that they don't become impediments in becoming more competitive or even growth.
Deep, would you like to
Finally,
wind up?
Finally,
Yes.
last point is that today cross-border cooperation has become absolutely essential. We have seen that in development of vaccinations, etc. But unless we are tying up across borders and have cooperations and collaborations, we can never be competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Amitabh Khan. Amitabh, are you there? Hello? Hello?
Hello. Yeah, sir, I left due to some urgent commitment.
Oh, he is gone, is he?
Yes, sir, I saw.
Okay. Thank you. May I now invite Maithili Bushnurmat, another 5 to 7?
Yeah. Hi, Pradeep. I'm here. Yeah, but in the interest
good.
of time, I will be very brief, Pradeep. And I first must start by complimenting CUTS for drawing up this excellent blueprint. But I would like to call it more a wish list for an enabling environment for what you call Samaj, Sarkar and Bazar to work together. But as we've seen in the past, it's very difficult to arrive at a truly enabling environment in a democracy like India, where vote bank politics plays such a major role. Now, why do I say this? Why do I say this? Just look at the rationale of farm laws. The very rationale of farm laws was strongly justified on economic principles. There was no reason why it should not have gone through. This was something that has been debated, and contrary to what people would say, that this was not discussed. This was something that has been discussed for almost 2 decades, not just by this government, but by previous governments also. But what did we see? Subsequently, we saw even somebody, a so-called strongman like Mr. Modi, have to backtrack because of election politics. So I'm just saying that all that you put forth is very excellent. Nobody will dispute almost any of the suggestions that you put through, except that 1 or 2, I felt there were some contradictions which I'll point out. But apart from that, things like institutional development, spending on education, spending on health, these are things, Pradeep, I think nobody will dispute. I think you'll find it hard to find anybody who will contradict you on that. The point is, how do we translate these wonderful ideas into action? And that has always been our Achilles heel. In India, we're just not able to translate these blueprints, and there have been n number of blueprints. How do we translate them into action in a democracy? If you really want to believe in carrying the last man with you, if you really want to be immune to election politics, then how do we really, ensure that these blueprints get translated into action? China has a very easy job. India is very often unfairly compared with China. That is because in China, when the leadership decides to do something, they can just ram it down people's throats. In India, we cannot. So that, I think, is one key point that you must consider whenever you make these blueprints. How do you really translate them into action? Let me just give you just 2 or 3 examples, and I'll stop with that. For instance, you've talked about giving MSMEs access to funds, bank credit. I'm talking about banks because that's one area that I'm a little familiar with. Now, how do you ensure access to bank credit in the case of MSMEs where they really don't have a viable business model? After all, I think it's important to realize that banks are not in the business of charity. I think this is something that we repeatedly fail to understand. We think that banks lend out money, give money, which governments can subsequently write off, which governments can subsequently come and say, okay, we're waiving the interest, we're waiving the principal, farm loan waivers, MSME waivers. That's just not how it works. Banks are commercial entities. They take money from depositor, hard-earned savings of people like you and I, and much poorer people perhaps, and then give loans. If these loans don't come back, ultimately it is the poor of this country who suffer. I think that is something that we really must understand. So that is my first quibble with you. The second point that you really say, you talk about strengthening the judiciary. Now, this again, I think is something that we've talked about till the cows come home, but we've seen that the judiciary, not only is it not getting strengthened, not only are the delays inevitable and almost growing by the day, but we also have the issue of judicial overreach in a whole lot of areas. We've just seen the recent case where the judiciary has asked for a CBI inquiry into a disinvestment that happened in 2002. How far back are we going to go? Does the judiciary not understand the meaning of market price? Market price is what the market is willing to quote today, not tomorrow, not yesterday. So it is high time we stop reopening the past unless there is proven malified intent. So that again is another area I think we must recognize. You've spoken again of governance, and you say that, yes, we must try and fix bureaucrats, rent-seeking bureaucrats. I mean, come on, Pradeep, you and I are too long in the tooth to know that there's no such thing as questioning a bureaucrat who has got rent-seeking bureaucrats. There are n number of such bureaucrats, and we really have not been able to get them to, pull them up and hold them to task. So wonderful suggestions. I just wish we could act on them. But the only thing I must compliment you on is that unless we go on and on, just repeating the same thing like a stuck record in a country like ours, nothing will happen. So my compliments for going on saying what has been said many times before in a very cogent fashion, in a very clear fashion. I just wish that all of us could somehow ensure that these things happen. Amitabh Kant spoke about reforms in the discoms. I mean, where are we going to get Punjab to charge farmers for power and water? I mean, I wish we could do it. We're not, now the farmers are demanding legislation on MSP. So unless I think all of us in civil society, and I'm there, I think you are doing a wonderful job of taking the lead. Civil society must raise its voice when vested interests try to ram down their agenda. So for this, let me end over here with my compliments for you to keep going at it again and again and again until someday all of us get it. Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank you, Maithili. You answered what I would have answered you, that we continue to, we never give up, and you have to continue to build up the narrative. The moment the narrative stops, Maithili, the problem that I've seen, things can backslide. And at least we are resisting, any backsliding. With that, may I now come to Rajat, please. Rajat?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Pradeep.
Have you stopped your car?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We see you bobbing all the time. We can see you, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. I am going to repeat a few things that have already been said by Deep and Maithili, and of course, Amitabh ji and Mr. Rao. Thank you, Pradeep, for inviting me for this session. Wonderful report. And I must start by saying that, having worked in policy for several years, now I've changed my hat, I've moved into back into academics, but having worked in policy, I can't but help agree with Maithili and with you that, policy making and pushing that needle on policy making, it happens two ways. One, when you're on the edge of a precipice, crisis-driven reforms, which we've seen in India. So if we have to make some reforms on competitiveness, I think you will need a crisis, or you will need to go in incremental steps, what Montague has called eloquently gradualism. And hopefully that gradualism will add up and result in a big bang over a period of time. So I think crisis-driven reform is something which we've been accustomed to. And if we keep repeating it, maybe we can take small steps to improve competitiveness. So I want to make three very quick points, and they are echoing what has been said already. And in my areas of interest and maybe research expertise, somewhat. One is the point about trade policy. And I can't but help agree with you that trade and industrial policy need to be coherent. And also that we must now begin to make an industrial policy which enables competitiveness. That is something that we desperately need to do. And we haven't really done that in a cohesive manner or coherent manner. And as you said, that we've had this inverted duty structure in place. It's going away now, but it's still been there. And there's an overhang of that in our economy, especially in the sectors that we are competitive at. Now, this age-old debate of manufacturing versus services, I'm not going to get into, but I just want to repeat a point that Amitabh made with a little more force, that you can't become competitive without being present in the global market. No country in the world has become globally competitive without being competitive in the global market. And being competitive in the global market means exporting to the global market, and exporting to the global market means that you can't have protectionism in the economy. We learned that lesson the hard way before 1991. We were a country where people could sell at high price, poor quality goods at any time they wanted. After 91, there's been some change, but I think we need to go further and dismantle protectionism, because tariffs no longer give you revenue. Revenue is not going to be a rise in the etre for the economy. Today, protectionism is the rise in the etre for, tariffs are the rise in the etre for protectionism. So we need to move away from that. I mean, you can enable domestic competitiveness or domestic firms other ways, not through protectionism, not through tariffs. And the way to do that is things that we've been doing, ease of doing business, etc. And that's the route we should pursue. And I strongly believe that we should get into regional trade agreements, even if we have not signed RCEP. I think we should, at the future, look at getting into RCEP, because that will be an instrument for competitiveness for us. And one last point, we have to get away from this obsession that India has at looking at bilateral tariff deficit or bilateral trade deficits as not wanting to engage with nations. No country can run a current account surplus with every country. You have to run with some countries, you'll have a surplus. With some countries, you'll have a deficit. Maybe you need to rework those trade agreements. Maybe we didn't negotiate them better. But don't blame the fact that we have a current account deficit that we are not able to penetrate that market. Maybe it's what you are saying. Maybe it's lack of competitiveness. So I think on trade policy, that's the route I would go. On the other point, and this is what Mr. Deep has said very well, and I want to reinforce that. One of the challenges of globalization, one of the challenges of greater integration with the rest of the economy has been inequality. And inequality has been a problem in both our models of growth, pre-91 and post-91. And I think digitization offers hope. Of course, taxation is an instrument that needs to be improved. Take from the rich, give to the poor, etc., etc. But I think digitization provides hope. Digitization will not only increase growth, but also enable inclusion. So this conflict between growth and inclusion that we talk about, as Deep said, both of them can go together potentially if you have greater digitization and digitalization in the economy. India used to serve the export market and will continue to serve the export market for digitalization and digitization. But I think NASSCOM reports also say that the potential for digitization and digitalization at home today is huge. So outsourcing within the country for digitalization offers great scope, especially what you said, Pradeep, about MSMEs and SMEs also. So there is a great challenge there. And of course, the Jan Dhan, the JAM, Trinity, all of that will provide incentives for greater integration of the unbanked into the system and therefore enable greater equality. I think inequality is something that we focus on, and inequality and jobs will go together. Greater jobs in manufacturing will mean hopefully lesser inequality. And I'm not an alarmist that we are going to lose jobs to the fourth industrial revolution. And that's a matter for another day, but I don't think that will happen. The last point I wish to make is about the social sector, something that Amartya Sen has been saying for several years, and Maithili just mentioned that, is that we don't invest enough in social sector, in education, etc. And I think we have to shift that and enable private sector also. But there is there are things where the private sector will not go. I mean, primary health centers in rural areas have to be run by governments. And I think the focus of health policy and systemic health policy in India should be to keep people out of hospitals. Private sector often gets people into hospitals, but you need to create these primary health centers, especially in the rural areas, and things that health policy people are working on is that get people out of hospitals, create a healthy labor force, a productive labor force, etc. The logic should be preventive rather than curative. And I think that's something we should focus on health. As we remake health policy, as we remake Ayushman Bharat as a result of the pandemic and look beyond, I think both education and health need to come to center stage. Education, to a large extent, higher education will be taken care of by the private sector. But primary education, as ASAR reports tell us, in the government sector, they have to be improved. So government has a role to play in health and education, especially, as I said, in primary education, in primary healthcare centers. That's where the government needs to get its act together. We should focus on that. And lastly, conclude by saying, keep repeating it, because as I said, having worked on policy for so many years in government, until you keep saying the same thing, and multiple people have to say the same thing more and more times to move the needle on policy change. So congratulations, Pradeep, for putting together this.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you very much. I do see the need to amend the white paper to some extent, particularly the focus on digitalization, etc., which and its impact on inequality, particularly of poverty, etc. But just one point which you made, and I'll come back to the next panelist, and a point which was made by Maithili also. In terms of farm laws, they were excellent laws. We wrote a paper also. We've been working on reform of APMC Act for donkey's years. The process was bad. To bring in, the government brought in ordinances. Dr. Keshav Rao, he being chairman of the Standing Committee on Commerce, you would be able to say that. And then bringing in a law without any proper consultation. So the Montag said gradualism, we have said it, Vijay Kelkar has been saying it, that reforms, particularly of such nature, which affect people at large, should be done on a gradual basis and by building up a consensus. And that was not done in this particular thing. And this has had, unfortunately, spillover effects on other areas as well. And people have started writing, whether other reforms are going to be held up or not. Dr. Keshav Rao, would you like to react quickly on this?
The question is, you belong to an entirely different school of thought. We have been opposing this bill from the beginning, right, on ideological basis. We always think that there has to be some kind of a social control on markets, particularly a market which has that kind of a dimension, where the 60% of people depend on that. So this requires a regulated marketing system, which we have in place. Now to remove that and try to force the corporatization or whatever you call privatization thing would have really shaken us. This is how we opposed it from the beginning. Even essential commodities being tagged to the farm laws, bringing all sorts of other laws along with it, but something which is wrong. This is how we took a stand from the beginning. And for us, it's now history, unless Modi ji again thinks prudent to bring it in other form.
Thank you very much. Now I turn to Bornali Bhandari from NCER. Bornali, over to you, 5 to 7 minutes.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for inviting me and to this very eminent panel. And good evening, everyone. Congratulations to CUTS for an excellent and very all-comprehensive paper. It is really very all-comprehensive. And my points, after coming a very series of eminent panelists, there's nothing new to say. But this point that I want to make 3 points, which might sound repetitive. The first one, the importance of this paper cannot be emphasized much more. When we did and we have been, NCR has been following forecasting for the last couple of years now. And when we did our forecast, we ran our simulations. What it indicates is that the 21-22 forecast is going to be about 9 to 10% growth. That's about, so essentially what it means is we will catch up with 2019-20 output levels when after 2 years of lost growth. After that is if we grow at 7% growth rate, 7%, it will still take us 10 years to catch up with what we would have been, the trend growth part of what would have been growing without the pandemic. And this 10 years, when that means by 29-30 only will catch up with the trend growth part of the counterfactual. Which means this next 10 years are very critical for us because the demographic transition is, we will be reaching the peak around that point of time. After that, our dependency would be trending down. Dependency population, per share of dependency population would be going down. So this paper, the timing and the importance of this paper cannot be emphasized because we have to implement reforms if we want to catch up with what we have lost due to the pandemic. I mean, of course, the economy was even slowing down pre-pandemic, But that's the first point. So the timing and critical importance of this paper is very important. The second point I do want to add here is about technology, and I know that I'm coming after both Maitli and this thing. So NCR does tracks firms, 500 to 600 firms around 6 major cities, and what we find is that firms, as Maitli said, firms are not taking credit. In the latest September one, firms were not taking credit, not because they thought the interest rates were too high or there were issues. Those exist. But the key reason they were not taking credit is because there's not enough demand. So demand reasons dominated the concern. So, and in the long term or the medium term, unless and until they have a business plan, firms will not take credit. And that's the key. That's very clearly that's coming out in our work too. But the important thing is in the medium to long run, the nature of, it's not just particular technology, but it is the nature of technological change. The technology is changing fast. Unlike the 60s, unlike the Industrial Revolution, the industrial technology is changing fast, which means is that we need a very flexible and a responsive economy, which means that so I'm going to focus on two stakeholders, the firms. The firms essentially need to upgrade technology. The MSMEs specifically need to adopt technology. And what we find in a very simplistic way, we had asked firms over the last 1 year whether they were whether they were adopting the e-commerce platform to sell goods and services. Just in the last 1 year, from the pre-March 2020 period, the share of firms which adopted e-commerce platforms went up from 18% to 54% in September. So what we find, in June. So the share of firms are adopting technology is going up, but we don't yet know the black box. So the technology is very important. Firms need to adopt it, especially MSMEs need to be encouraged to adopt technology in all kinds, inventory planning, human resources, selling and buying goods and services. A lot of B2B platforms also they're adopting. On the other hand, when we talk about the skilled workforce, the workforce itself, my previous panelist talked about the fourth industrial revolution, IR. So here again, we need to, when we talk about fourth industrial revolution, we need different types of skills. It's not just enough to focus on vocational skills. You need cognitive skills, advanced cognitive skills, and you need socio-emotional skills, collaborative, teamwork, anger management, and so on and so forth. So those issues become important, and that comes down to the point that Dr. Kathuria was making, that the ASA reports talk about the improving the quality of school, the learning, but it's also bigger than that, that we need to improve the quality of schools, quality of education, along with opening up the vocational training as a third option. So it's not just enough to teach about reading and writing, but we also need to learn about lifelong learning, because technology is changing so rapidly that the workforce needs to adapt, that it's not about lifetime employment, but lifelong learning. So we need to be able to reskill and upskill, not only skill the new entrants, but reskill and upskill our workforce. So skilling is very, very important, and it goes along with education. And we need to look at skills in a more all-comprehensive fashion. So the technology per se, the nature of technology has impact on both firms and the workforce. So one key, I think one key point that could be emphasized again in this in this note is, and this is my last point here, is that we need a competitive workforce, and therefore we need to invest in health and the education sector. We need to scale up investment in health and education. Education, of course, much has been said, much has been done, and much more needs to be done, especially after the 2 years that we have lost. And health, of course, there's been a lot of investment in health because of the pandemic. How do we scale it up and sustain it and reduce the burden on this thing becomes very, very important. And on inequality, though it's now quite old, but my dissertation happened to be on foreign direct investment and income inequality. And I remember a line by Dr. Bhagwati in his book, In Defense of Globalization. He said that it's not important, it's not that foreign direct investment or external investment causes inequality, it is the domestic factors. So we need to improve that to address inequality. On that note, thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we segue right into Dr. Bhagwati's former student, Rajiv Lal. Rajiv, over to you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for inviting me, and good evening to fellow panelists, Sri Keshav Raoji and other participants. Coming late in the sequence is challenging, but I will try my best to enrich further the conversation that is already rich with insight. So let me start. I have basically 4 points to make. My first point is that I don't think that it is enough anymore to keep repeating the same message. So as valuable as it is to keep repeating, throwing the book at the public discourse in terms of the textbook kind of trajectory that we need to follow, take the trouble and invest much more time in thinking through, writing about, and provoking debate about how to get things done. So a better understanding of the political economy, making constructive suggestions about how to address it, really has to become a part of our narrative. So for example, on the farm laws, the reality is, whatever the economic rationality of the laws, there is very deep and fundamental mistrust between the players that are involved or that have been involved. A. B. There are clearly a group of very concentrated farmers who are disproportionately affected by the suggestions that have been made in the laws. And so, so consultation is one thing, but how do you actually prepare the ground to make that happen? I think would be very useful ground for research. And one of the ways of going about that is, it's not as if all the reforms that we've done have been by stealth or have been gradual in nature. There have been notable successes of reforms that have been well prepared, that have actually navigated the very tricky political economy situation. So, if you recall the delicensing of sugar and then the elimination of levy sugar, these are very politically sensitive issues, but they were navigated and they happened without too much of a noise. So maybe shining the light on those kinds of examples, learning from them, would be an important body of work for us to do. That's the first point. Second point I wanted to make is that one thing that doesn't come out enough, even in the conversation today, is that the need for us to focus on competitiveness is actually born out of serious structural difficulties that the economy is facing. The impression that people have that this is a temporary cyclical low, investment will pick up. If we just invest a little more, we do a little bit of that, a little bit of this, the economy will be back onto a 7-8% trajectory. That is just not the case. At least my reading of the evidence is that since 2011-12, there has been a structural break in India's growth trajectory. And our structural transformation is actually quite vitiated. So I think Bonali was mentioning lack of demand as one of the reasons why firms are not investing. This is a very important point. There is sluggish demand because of the nature of our transformation, which I say is vitiated. The people that are getting displaced from low productivity agriculture are going into low productivity services and in the informal sector. And therefore, their wages are not rising fast enough. There is not sufficient domestic demand, therefore, to create a sustainable growth dynamic. So this is a very deep-rooted structural problem, and we need to understand that. Third point I wanted to make is that I'm not at all as sanguine as Rajat seemed to be about the implications of the fourth industrial revolution. So while I 100% believe that digitization offers new and imaginative possibilities for connecting micro enterprises to the rest of the world and the formal economy, and therefore for inclusion, etc., etc., all the things that Amitabh Kant was talking about, where there's genomics, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, this, that, and the other, all this requires a really sea change in the skill set for India to become globally competitive. So I think that there is a challenge and a conflict between our need, and it's a need, we must have it, to be globally competitive and to remain inclusive. So I hate to sound a little pessimistic about this, but my own view is that since being globally competitive is strategically and vitally important for us for a whole variety of reasons, it is inevitable that there will be growing pressures domestically that make our economy more unequal. And therefore, preparing for that, not only through a more effective new welfareism, but also through effective investment in skilling and education becomes that much more important. So skilling and education is not just important for competitiveness, it is vital for social stability and cohesion. And that brings me to my fourth point, which is that maybe one thing that is missing as a theme, not just only in the report that CUTS have given us, but also in all the reform initiatives, and there have been many in this government, right, is an overarching theme and narrative for, let's call it, the next generation of reforms. Right? When you look at the specific recommendations that the CUTS report, the white paper makes, I count at least 5, if not 6 out of the 8 as comprising what I'd called soft reforms. They are fairness and competition, fixing the judiciary, everything that is to do with the ease of doing business, bureaucratic mindsets, even your strategic protectionism. For it to work, it requires a degree of sophistication that I'm not sure our bureaucratic establishment currently possesses. Long and short of it is what I'm saying is that the one connecting and overarching theme for the next generation of reforms is really a repositioning, a bolstering of capacity and capability of the state itself. So we have to recognize this and this is very hard to do. And it's going to take not a few years, it's going to take a generation to get it done. So if we are able to think about it in a thematic way, this is all that we have to do to actually execute on the various concrete ideas that have been put on the table for improving competitiveness. I think the better it would be. Just to give an example to make this clear, it is one thing to say that we need investments in education and in health. And as Maithili said, we really need to know how are we going to make it happen so that we are not just throwing money, but we are actually creating outcomes that work for people. And that requires a degree of state capability that we haven't in the past shown that we have. And unless we build that systematically and develop that, we will not be able to very easily navigate this transition.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you very much. Dr. Keshav Rao, are you there? Dr. Keshav Rao? Well, he sent me a note saying that he wanted to leave. And if there was any question, but then I suppose he has left. With that, I would like to open the floor, Nagesh, to the panelists if they have any last minute thoughts to make before I turn it over to you, we have about 6 minutes left. So about a minute to two to each. Deep, any last minute thoughts or any reactions to some of the other panelists' points?
I've been listening with close attention to all the panelists and whatever has been said. I do believe that we have a lot of potential as far as industry goes in terms of being competitive within the four walls of our own companies. And we have shown that. We have shown the deployment. I mean, people may be slightly pessimistic about it, but we have actually demonstrated that there are pockets of excellence which are there in companies. We have a robotic company, we have which competes with the best of the best. Today we have a ADAS system which is on Bharat Benz, accepted by a German company. So there are startups which are emerging out of second-tier cities just because there is a digital platform available. So we need to be also more, I think, in our self-image, more positive. I think that's a single point.
Very good point, sir. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Maithili, Rajat? Okay, then let me turn over
I could just ask you one thing in your paper, which I was a little intrigued. You talk about increasing export competitiveness, increasing the share of exports, and you also advocate strengthening of the exchange value, in fact, advocate appreciation of the rupee. Isn't that contrary?
No. If you notice carefully, the language is to fix the value of the rupee. It doesn't talk about appreciation. But we don't want to use the word depreciation also.
Okay.
And this point has come particularly from Ajay Shankar in one of our webinars earlier, that look, we continue to artificially keep our... And with that, let me now turn to Nagesh, my collaborator and partner for this particular event. I'm so happy that ISID has agreed to partner with us in this particular event. And in fact, one of the points which was made by several is particularly Rajiv, that we need to develop some action plans in the sense that, how do we go about implementation, or at least implementation strategies. With CII's help, I think we should take it forward, ISID, CUTS, and CII, and Niti Aayog too. I mean, I'm sure Amitabh would be very happy, and so would Rajiv be happy to work with us in this particular area. With that, Nagesh, over to you.
Thank you, Pradeep. It was wonderful listening to all of the very eminent panelists. I think it is very, you have asked me to summarize all the discussion. It's nearly impossible to bring what was a very rich discussion, into some coherent narrative so quickly. What I will do is to just confine myself to a few bullet points which have sort of been resonating across the remarks of all the key speakers here. So I think what came out is this emphasis on the competitiveness, because without competitiveness we can't really go forward very far, and that is linked to productivity, and that is linked to well-being. So this is wholesome and big picture view, which actually was articulated very well by Dr. Rao himself. So emphasis on well-being as a starting point for productivity, and then to leading to competitiveness, and that driving growth is something which has resonated through many remarks over the this webinar. Then for competitiveness, many things have been pointed out which drive competitiveness, and Mr. Kant focused on the need to get size and scale and what is being done to get that. And of course, besides size and scale, the logistics, the infrastructure constraints, the power, sort of prices, and all that is critical. But the digital, sort of transformation of India is also going to be extremely critical driver or factor in competitiveness. And on that, number of panelists elaborated further, including Rajat, Maithili, and Mr. Deep Kapuria. So, and I like the way that this digitalization was picked up as a theme for transformation in India, not only for just competitiveness, but also for inclusive development. So digitalization being used to drive societal transformation, which was very interestingly coming out from a number of statements made. And I think we need to really harness the power of digital transformation for India's economic development and competitiveness. So that is something which has come out very well. Then I wanted to just pick up a couple of other points. I think besides size and scale, which Mr. Amitabh Kant emphasized, this need for coordinated pursuit of trade and industrial policy for competitiveness. I think that cannot be emphasized more. And I think Rajat was one who emphasized on that. And of course, Mr. Amitabh Kant. So we need to be in the global markets to be competitive. And for that, whatever needs to be done, including trade agreements. And reference was made to, in particular, the RCEP, which we have been still mulling over and have not been able to hook up to. It could become an important factor in driving trade and investments. So that is something which government needs to look into. And then I think another pillar which has resonated across most of the remarks and panelists have emphasized is this social development or human development, if you like. The emphasis on education and health, which we have not been giving due attention to, and that has become a major driver, major factor in overall economic, not only development but and growth, but also well-being and sustainability of growth is now. There is a very big sort of recognition to the fact that human development ultimately and also addressing inequalities ultimately affect the sustainability of growth. And so what Mr. Rajiv Lal was saying at the end, this structural break, that you see in India's growth process since 2012, is that this, slackening demand, and so that may be resulting from rising inequalities, people not having purchasing power in their hands, and so because of extreme concentration of income and wealth at the top. So that is one. And then investing adequately in human development, whether it is health and education. And there, I think the difference needs to be made on the parts or segments of education and health that will not be taken up by private sector, especially primary health, centers, for instance, or primary education. And there we need to focus on the outcomes. We need to have the quality besides quantity. So not only that everyone is covered, leaving no one behind, as the Sustainable Development Goals argue, but also everyone gets a similar kind of quality of access. So unless we do that, we are not going to have sustained growth. and well-being. And then I think the other point which Mithili drove home was this reality check. Then there are limits to reforms, howsoever they may be well crafted. They have limitations because of our democratic system. And in that context, Mr. Rajiv Lal mentioned about not only it is enough to keep on hammering the point, but also demonstrate the way how to get there. And so building a kind of a right framework and narrative, as he said, for reforms to take hold and be convincing to people. So I think this was broadly, the kind of bulleted list of things which came out. But I must compliment you, Pradeep, for not only putting up a very good paper, but also bringing together all the right people to talk about it. And this dialogue, this afternoon, I thoroughly enjoyed. So thank you very much. And over to you. You are muted. You are muted, Pradeep.
Well,
Yes.
let me also thank all on behalf of ISID and CUTS for this webinar. And some of the points which have been made would help us to refine the paper, which we would, and particularly in terms of what we have always stressed upon in our own work was implementability. How can we show that, this is implementable, and can we do some kind of pilot somewhere? And with that, as I said, I'd be happy that if we can work together with all you, including ISID and CII, in taking this movement forward, taking this campaign forward. Thank you very much.